The railroad crossing sign was flashing red when I stopped my car that night, but there was no train coming. There was only the truck idling ahead of me, its exhaust curling up into the cold October air like something trying to escape. I remember thinking it was odd that someone else was out this far at this hour. The nearest town was 11 miles back, and this stretch of rural highway connected nothing to nothing. Then, the passenger door swung open. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting through my windshield. I thought maybe someone was going to be sick, or maybe they needed help. What I saw instead made my stomach drop straight through the floor of my car. A bundle of something dark was kicked, and I mean kicked, with force and intention, out onto the gravel shoulder. The door slammed shut before the bundle even stopped rolling. The truck's engine gunned hard, crossed over the tracks, and disappeared into the dark so fast the taillights were gone before I could even think of looking for a plate number. I sat there for 3 full seconds, maybe 5. My brain was trying to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. Then, the bundle moved. I was out of my car before I'd consciously decided to get out. I ran across the gravel in the cold, my shoes crunching, and I crouched down over what I now realized was a dog. A big one. A coonhound by the look of him, or what was left of him. His ribs pressed against his skin like fingers pushing through a sheet. His coat was dull, his eyes were glassy and sunken, and he was curled in on himself like he was trying to become something smaller than the world could see. And then he coughed. I have never in my life heard a sound like that come out of an animal. It wasn't a bark, and it wasn't a wheeze. It was a full-body convulsion that started somewhere deep in his chest and came out of him like something being torn loose. His back legs actually lifted off the gravel with the force of it. And then, between the coughs, this is the part that broke me completely. He cried. Not a whimper, a cry, like a person in a room alone who doesn't think anyone can hear them. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around him before I even thought about whether I should. He didn't snap at me. He didn't try to run. He just looked at me with those big, watery eyes. And I said the only thing I could think to say. Okay, I've got you. You're not alone anymore. I loaded him into my back seat and drove faster than I ever have in my life. The emergency vet clinic was 40 minutes away, and he coughed for every single one of them. By the time I carried him through the front doors, there was blood-tinged mucus on my jacket, and his breathing had taken on a wet, rattling quality that sounded like water in a pipe. The staff moved fast, faster than I expected. 2 technicians were already coming around the desk before I finished explaining what I'd seen at the tracks. And the moment one of them looked inside his mouth and saw the color of what he was bringing up, they exchanged a look that scared me more than anything that had happened so far. We need to isolate him immediately, the senior tech told me, her voice calm but firm. We're going to put him in our isolation ward. If this is distemper or a highly contagious form of pneumonia, we can't risk exposure to the other patients. They took him through a set of double doors, and I was left standing in the waiting room with blood on my shirt and no answers. 30 minutes later, I was allowed to stand outside the glass panel of the isolation room and watch. He was on a stainless steel table, hooked to a monitor, an oxygen line near his face. He looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights. The vet on duty, a tall man with kind eyes named Dr. Eris, came and stood beside me. His oxygen saturation is very low, he told me. His lungs are struggling badly. We're going to take x-rays now and get a clearer picture of what's happening inside. He paused. I need you to understand that if this is distemper, his chances are not good. It's a vicious disease, and in a dog this malnourished and this far along? What are the chances? I asked. He looked at the glass. Low. But let's see the x-rays first. Through the glass, the dog looked up.
straight at me. His ribs were heaving, his whole body working just to pull in air, and yet his eyes, those dark, exhausted eyes, were focused entirely on my face. Not desperate in the way of an animal about to bolt, desperate in the way of something that has decided, against all available evidence, to trust. I pressed my hand flat against the glass. He didn't look away. The x-rays took 20 minutes. I spent them in the waiting room with a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, going over every detail of what I'd seen at the tracks, wondering if the people in that truck had known what I was now sitting here facing, wondering if they simply hadn't cared, or if they'd told themselves it was kinder than a vet bill. Dr. Aris came back with a face that answered my unasked question before he said a single word. He sat down across from me and set a printed image on the chair between us. Even to my untrained eye, I could see the problem. The lungs were a mess, gray and clouded where they should have been dark. But on the right side, there was something else entirely. A large, dense, dark mass sitting at the base of the right lung like a fist clenched around something it refused to release. His lungs are significantly filled with fluid, Dr. Aris said. But this, he tapped the mass, is what concerns me most. This shadow. Given its size and its density, and given his overall condition, I believe we are looking at an aggressive lung tumor. Possibly primary lung cancer, possibly metastatic. I stared at the image. He's emaciated, he continued gently. His body is under extreme stress. Treating cancer in a dog this compromised, surgery, chemotherapy, the suffering involved would be considerable, and the prognosis would still be very poor. He folded his hands. My recommendation, and I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty, is humane euthanasia, to end his suffering tonight, before it gets worse. He leaned forward slightly. I think whoever had him, I think they knew. I think that's why they left him. The room was very quiet. I looked at the x-ray image. I looked at the mass. Can I go in and sit with him? I asked. Of course, he said. The isolation room smelled antiseptic and warm. They'd put a thin blanket under him, and he was lying on his side, the oxygen line close to his nose, the monitor beeping steadily. I sat down on the floor next to the table and just stayed there for a moment, not touching him, not talking, just being in the room with him. I had come in to say goodbye. But then, a strange thing happened. Between one coughing fit and the next, in a gap of maybe 90 seconds where his lungs gave him a reprieve, he lifted his head. He looked at me. He stretched his neck out and pushed his nose against my hand. And then, I am not exaggerating, I need you to understand I am not exaggerating, he tried to wag his tail. It was weak, barely a twitch, but it was there. And then he sniffed at the edge of the blanket like he was exploring it, interested in it. I thought about my grandmother in her last weeks. I had sat beside her in a room a lot like this one. I knew what the end looked like on a living thing. I knew the stillness that settles in, the way the eyes go from seeing to simply enduring. This dog's eyes were seeing. He was here, fully, stubbornly, inconveniently here. A technician brought in a small dish of soft food, just to see if he would eat, they said. More to test his responsiveness than because they expected anything. He ate it in 4 seconds and looked up for more. Dying things don't do that. I've sat with dying things. This wasn't that. I went back out to Dr. Aris. I'm not authorizing euthanasia, I said. I want a second opinion. I want a specialist. He looked at me carefully. Not unkindly. I understand. I want to make sure you understand the risks of waiting. I understand them, I said. I just watched him try to wag his tail and inhale a bowl of food. I'm not ending his life on an x-ray. I looked back through the glass. His name is Copper, I said. It came out before I'd even fully decided it, but once I'd said it, it felt exactly right. He still had metal in him to fight, and we're going to find someone who can tell me what's actually happening in his chest.
I drove 3 hours the next morning with Copper in a travel crate in my backseat, an emergency referral from Dr. Ayres in my passenger seat, and a thermos of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. A university teaching hospital was our destination, the kind of place with specialists and equipment that a rural emergency clinic simply doesn't have. Copper's fever had climbed overnight despite the antibiotics they'd started him on. It was hovering at 104 degrees Fahrenheit by the time we arrived, which for a dog already weakened to his degree was genuinely alarming. He was quieter than the night before, which I'd initially taken as a hopeful sign until I realized it was because he was exhausted, not better. The specialist was a veterinary internist named Dr. Okafor. She was methodical, unhurried, and deeply serious in the way of someone who has seen enough cases to know that assumptions are the enemy of accuracy. She reviewed Dr. Ayres' x-rays, examined Copper thoroughly, and then ordered a CT scan without a word of disagreement or agreement about the original diagnosis. The CT results changed the shape of things, though not in the way I'd hoped for. "The mass is not solid," Dr. Okafor told me, and I felt something shift in my chest. "It's not behaving the way a tumor behaves. The interior has a different consistency. This looks more consistent with an abscess, a large, enclosed pocket of infection, than with a malignancy." She paused. "But here's where I have to be honest with you. We don't know what caused it. Bacterial cultures are inconclusive. Fungal tests are negative. His immune response is consistent with something the body is trying to fight, but we can't identify the invader." She set down the scan images. "I want to look directly inside his lung. I want to perform a bronchoscopy." "What is that?" I asked. "A camera, down his windpipe, into his lungs. If there's something in there causing this, I want to see it with my own eyes." I sat in a waiting room for 2.5 hours while they scoped Copper's lungs. I scrolled through my phone without seeing anything on it. I called my sister twice, and both times couldn't figure out what I actually wanted to say. I drank the coffee from my thermos that had gone completely cold. When Dr. Okafor came through the door, her expression was something I hadn't seen on her face before. It wasn't the composed seriousness of a doctor delivering difficult news. It was something closer to controlled astonishment. "I need you to come look at something," she said. She brought me into a room with a monitor still displaying frozen footage from the bronchoscope camera. She walked me through it, the camera entering his trachea, descending through the branching passages of his airway, moving deeper and deeper into the right lung where the mass was located. The tissue around it was angry and inflamed, red and swollen in a way that looked almost like rage. The camera moved carefully through pools of amber fluid, past walls of irritated tissue. And then she pointed to the image frozen on the screen. There, lodged in the deepest tissue of his lung, surrounded by a wall of the body's own desperate defenses, was something that should never have been inside a living creature at all. A tiny, slender, barbed spike of organic matter. Brown, pointed at one end, barely an inch long. A grass seed. A foxtail. "It was inhaled," Dr. Okafor said quietly, "probably months ago, possibly on a single walk through a field. Once it entered his airway, the barbs made it impossible for his body to expel it. It migrated, moved forward, always forward, because that's what these seeds are designed to do, until it pierced through the wall of his lung tissue. His body built a wall of infection around it, trying to contain it. That wall became the abscess. The abscess became the mass on the X-ray. The mass nearly became a death sentence." I looked at the frozen image on the screen. That tiny, vicious, ordinary thing. "So it was never cancer," I said. "It was never cancer," she confirmed. "A foxtail. A grass seed, a weed that grows in overgrown lots in dry fields and along roadsides across half the country. A weed so common that most people have walked past it 1,000 times without a second thought. That was what had nearly killed Copper. That was what had cost him his home, his owners, and very nearly his life. Dr. Okafor sat with me for a long time explaining what came next, and I want to be honest. The cure was nearly as frightening as the original diagnosis. The foxtail had caused a condition called pyothorax, a buildup of infected fluid in the chest cavity between the lungs and the chest wall. It was severe. The seed itself had migrated so deep into the lung tissue that the bronchoscope camera could see it but not safely retrieve it. The surrounding damage was too extensive. The infection is too entrenched. Copper needed open chest surgery, a thoracotomy. They would have to crack his ribs open to access the lung directly, remove the seed, and address the damage it had caused. Without surgery, he will die, Dr. Okafor said. The infection will overwhelm him within days. But I want you to understand the surgery is serious. He is already compromised. There are real risks. I thought about him nudging my hand through the oxygen line. I thought about the bowl of food inhaled in 4 seconds. I thought about the tail that had twitched. "Schedule the surgery," I said. I am not a religious person in any organized sense, but I sat in that waiting room during Copper's surgery, and I bargained with every force and concept I could think of. I bargained with the universe, with luck, with time, with whatever nameless thing had brought me down that particular road at that particular hour in the middle of the night. The surgery took 4 hours and 40 minutes. What the surgeons found when they opened his chest, Dr. Okafor told me afterward, carefully because she believed I deserved the full truth, was worse than the scans had suggested. The foxtail had continued its migration even in the days between discovery and surgery. It had moved to within millimeters of the aorta, the main artery leaving the heart. 1 more millimeter of travel, and there would have been nothing anyone could have done. The surgeon's job was to remove the seed without disturbing the tissue it had already invaded, without nicking the blood vessels around it, without causing a hemorrhage that would end everything on the table. They had to remove 1 full third of Copper's right lung to ensure they got all of the infected tissue. They flushed the chest cavity repeatedly to clear the pyothorax. They placed a chest tube to drain the fluid that would continue to accumulate as his body healed. And then they closed him up and brought him to recovery. The surgeon called it a success. She said the word carefully, with appropriate weight, the way people say words they know can be undone. But she said it. The bill was $8,000. I sat with that number for a long time. I'm not wealthy. I have a decent job and a small savings account, and a mortgage I'm still working through. $8,000 was not nothing. $8,000 was a lot of something. I had no one to hold responsible. Whoever owned Copper before that night at the railroad tracks had made their choice and driven away into the dark. There was no lawsuit, no recourse, no one to send a bill to. I set up a GoFundMe page late at night in the hospital waiting room. I didn't expect much. I wrote what had happened, the truck, the gravel, the coughing, the foxtail, the surgery, and I posted it with a single photo of Copper taken through the isolation room glass, his eyes looking directly at the camera. I went to sleep in a plastic hospital chair. I woke up to my phone buzzing continuously. By morning, local news had picked up the story. By afternoon, it had spread to several regional Facebook groups and then beyond them. People were calling it the story of the dog who coughed a seed. People were sharing it not just because they felt sorry for Copper, but because they were scared. Scared for their own dogs, their own fields, their own after-walk routines. I had no idea this could happen, comment after comment said. I'm checking my dog's paws right now. The surgery was fully funded in 18 hours. I cried in the parking lot of the hospital for 10 minutes before I could go back inside. Not just because of the relief, which was enormous, but because of what it meant. That the same species that had kicked a sick dog out of a moving truck was also the species that crowdfunded his surgery overnight because a stranger wrote the truth about him on the internet. Both things are real. Both things are human. The world contains both, and on that particular morning, the better half of it had shown up in full. Post-surgery, copper was a sight that was hard to look at and impossible to look away from. He had a drainage tube inserted between his ribs, taped in place, connected to a small collection unit. His right side was shaved and sutured in a long line. He was medicated for pain, which kept him drowsy, but in his brief waking moments, his eyes were clearer than I had seen them since the night at the tracks. And the cough was gone. I hadn't realized, until its absence, how much space that sound had taken up. It had been the constant backdrop of everything, that terrible, honking, full-body convulsion that had lifted his back legs off the gravel. Now there was nothing but the soft sounds of a healing animal breathing carefully, cautiously, as if learning to trust the process again. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days. I slept in the chair outside his recovery kennel. The staff brought me blankets and, on the second night, actual food, which I ate in embarrassed gratitude. Copper slept more deeply than I think he had in months. His body was finally able to rest instead of fighting. The morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Okafor came in with a quiet ceremony and removed the chest tube. Copper flinched at the sensation, blinked, adjusted. And then he took a breath. A full, slow, unobstructed breath, the kind of breath that fills a chest from the bottom up, that expands ribs outward, that ends in a small, satisfied exhale. I made a sound that I will not attempt to describe here. Dr. Okafor was professional about it, but she was smiling. Before I tell you what Copper's life looks like now, I need to tell you what I learned through all of this, because it is the reason I'm telling this story in the first place. Foxtails, also called grass-awns or sometimes cheatgrass, are seeds from certain weedy grasses that grow across enormous swaths of North America and Europe. They look, at a glance, like ordinary dried grass, a little like wheat. They turn brown and brittle in summer, and by late July and August, they are everywhere, in fields, along roadsides, in overgrown lots, in parks, in the kind of scrubby patches of land you walk through without thinking twice. The reason they are so dangerous is by design. These seeds are built like fishhooks. They have rigid barbs that allow them to move in only one direction, forward. This is how the plant spreads. The seeds catch on fur, on clothing, on skin, and they work their way deeper with every movement of muscle and tissue around them. They don't dissolve. They don't break down. They travel. They can be inhaled through the nose or mouth. They can enter through the ear canal. They can work through the skin between a dog's toes. Once inside, they migrate toward organs, toward the spine, toward the brain. Copper's foxtail had gone through his nose or mouth, down his trachea, through his bronchial passages, and then through the wall of his lung itself, where it had traveled to within millimeters of his aorta. A tiny, ordinary, common weed. That's all it was. Copper was abandoned because his owners believed he was broken beyond repair. He wasn't broken. He was wounded by something invisible and microscopic that had been killing him quietly from the inside for months, that had been misread as cancer, that had been nearly euthanized before anyone thought to look deeper. The diagnosis changed everything, not just his treatment, but his entire story, his entire future. What Copper's story taught me, I want to pass directly to you. Know what foxtails look like in your area. They resemble wheat or barley growing in clusters, turning brown and brittle as summer progresses. If you live in the western or central United States particularly, they are extremely common in dry, disturbed soil. After every walk in tall grass or scrubland, do a full body check on your dog before they come inside. This means running your hands between every toe, checking the armpits and groin, looking inside the ears, and checking around the eyes and muzzle. If you find a foxtail embedded in skin and you can see the base of it, use tweezers to remove it from the base. Never pull just the tip, because the barb will break off and remain inside. If you can't see the base, or if the dog is showing any sign of distress, go to a vet. Know the warning signs. Sudden, violent, nonstop sneezing can mean a foxtail is in the nose. Repeated head shaking or pawing at an ear can mean one is in the ear canal. A persistent honking cough, particularly one that gets progressively worse, can mean one has been inhaled. Limping and obsessive paw licking, especially in summer, is suspicious. None of these symptoms should be left to resolve on their own. If you have a long-haired dog, a golden retriever, a doodle, a spaniel, any breed with feathers around the feet, consider keeping the fur between their toes closely trimmed during late summer. Fur grabs these seeds the way Velcro grabs anything it touches. Short fur between the toes gives them far less to catch on. And finally, if your vet gives you a diagnosis that doesn't match what you're observing with your own eyes, ask for a second opinion. I am not saying I distrust your vet. Dr. Aris was working from the best information available to him, and he was honest with me every step of the way. I am saying trust your gut alongside the medicine. Copper tried to play between coughing fits. He ate food like he was starving for life. I almost let someone tell me that wasn't enough. It was enough. It was everything. It has been 4 months now. Copper has a scar that runs the full length of his right side, a long, curved line of raised tissue that the volunteers at the shelter's foster network have taken to calling his zipper. He owns it completely. He has no awareness of it whatsoever, which is exactly as it should be. He has slightly less lung capacity than a healthy coonhound his age and size. He won't be a hunting dog, and long runs have to be monitored carefully. But he is happy in a way that is almost difficult to be around without feeling something shift inside your own chest. He runs in the field behind my house in the mornings, not sprinting, but moving with the specific kind of joyful, loping determination that I have come to think of as his signature. He smells everything. He tracks everything. He is deeply, unreasonably interested in squirrels and completely unimpressed by cats. I walk with him in that field now with a different kind of attention than I used to walk anywhere. I wear long pants in the summer, and I check his paws and his ears every single time we come back inside. I keep his paw fur trimmed close. I scan the grass before I let him into a new area. On my windowsill, I keep a small glass jar. Inside it, preserved in nothing but air and time, is the foxtail they removed from Copper's lung. It is barely an inch long, brown and brittle and ordinary looking. If you didn't know what it was, you'd throw it away without a second thought. I know what it is. Sometimes I pick up the jar and look at it, and then I look at Copper, who is usually in a patch of sunlight somewhere, flat on his back with his legs in the air, deeply asleep, and I think about the whole impossible chain of things that had to go exactly right for him to be here. The hour I chose to drive home, the crossing I chose to stop at, the moment I chose to get out of the car instead of driving around, the moment I chose not to authorize euthanasia, the camera Dr. O'Coffer chose to run down his airway. Every link in the chain. The diagnosis changed everything. Not just his prognosis, and not just his treatment, and not just whether he would live or die. It changed the way I understand what it means to keep looking when the answer you've been given doesn't feel right. It changed the way I understand the relationship between a tiny cause and a catastrophic effect. And it changed, permanently and completely, the way I understand what it means to be found by something that wasn't ready to stop fighting yet. Copper wasn't broken. He was waiting for someone to look close enough to find the truth. Copper almost lost his life to a seed no bigger than your fingernail. His former owners looked at him and saw something beyond saving. They were wrong, but they were wrong because no one had thought to look closely enough, carefully enough, or with enough willingness to question the obvious answer. If you walk your dog in nature, in fields, along trails, in any area where dry grass grows in summer, you need to know about foxtails. You need to know what they look like, how to check for them, and what the warning signs of an internal migration look like before it becomes a crisis. Please share this story. Not because of me, and not even really because of Copper, though I'm obviously partial to him, but because right now, somewhere, there is a dog with a cough that isn't getting better, and its owners don't know what to look for. Maybe your share is the thing that finds them. Check your dog's paws after every walk. Check their ears, check the skin around their face after they've been in tall grass. And if something feels wrong, push for answers until you have ones that match what you're actually seeing. To follow Copper's story as he learns the full limits of his 1 2/3 lungs, as he perfects his squirrel surveillance operation, and as he grows into the ridiculously happy dog he was always supposed to be, subscribe and come back for the next chapter. He's got a lot of living left to do. We're just getting started.